The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
So the best place for me to start today's episode is by saying thank you. You who listen to me on a regular basis, whether you're a patron or not. And the reason I want to thank you is not just for your support, but for you hearing me, for you coming here on a regular basis to hear what I have to say about anything you have given me. And, you know, in a roundabout way, I've demanded, but you've afforded me the opportunity to speak about anything. Whether it be religious, whether it be international relations, foreign policy, whether it be economic policy, whether it be basic progressivism, which most of you found me around. Most of you discovered me during the 2015, 2016 primaries, Bernie Sanders, et cetera, et cetera. But you who remain never limited me to have to speak about just those issues. You come to hear what I have to say. And that's important. And that's important in context of the conversation that I had over the weekend. Today, I'm going to give you a piece of the conversation that I had with the two young guys. They're grown men, but, you know, compared to me, they're young. I think I'm at least 18 years older than I don't know. I lose track of time. But Q and Aaron, who are getting ready to put out a podcast, the Q, well, you know how young people are. They say they're going to do one thing, and I'm still waiting on this podcast, fellows, but I digress. The point is the conversation that we had really intersected with the conversation that I had with Professor Matt Sinkowitz, and just from a different angle in the conversation. So yesterday, if you heard yesterday's podcast, then you ended where we were discussing how identity could, at the very end of it all, after we deconstruct all the different lanes that we can participate in as voices in media, after we deconstruct all of the agendas and break it down, it could be that identity is at the core of it, is at the core of it all. And particularly in media, this might just be true. You know, I didn't make the assertion yesterday. I was, you know, just kind of thinking about it. But in media, identity really is all that matters. Specifically when you talk about demographics and trying to reach those demographics. I mean, that's literally at the core of what drives our media. 100%. And anyone who denies that is sadly mistaken. I mean, even if the core message of your media is something that's noble, it's still something that you have to shape to be heard by the masses. Demographics are core and key in reaching those demographics. And so the conversation that I had with Q and Aaron really intersects in this way. It's that in this media space, this new media space, it looks just like the old media space. This new, this independent media, progressive media, it looks and in many ways operates just like old media. Not in terms of corporate, you know, overlords and, you know, all the jargon that we put around it, but in terms of just the demographic that it serves. At the core of America, I mean, let's face it, at the core of America is a white supremacist nation, the heart of white supremacy. And this is, you know, you could take this as you could take this in the most negative connotation, which is, oh, everybody's a racist. Or you could take it quite literally, that at the core of this nation, from its founding, from the inception to now, the core demographic that has been catered to in this country has been white people, predominantly white men. That's just a matter of fact. And that being the case, if you, per our conversation yesterday with Professor Sinkowitz, if you cater to that whiteness as a person of color, in any form, whether you're catering to it as a conservative or a liberal or as a progressive, then you have your road easy, because there's a large group not just a large group, but a economically well-to-do group, right? That they see themselves reflected throughout society. It's like, know your audience. You know what it is? It's like the Five Heartbeats, the movie, the Five Heartbeats, where their song was a hit single, and the manager, in order to sell more records, put white faces on the cover of a black album. I mean, I know that has happened historically, and I didn't have to use a movie reference to it. But, you know, if you've been rolling with me for this long, then I need you to know who the Five Heartbeats and the Five Heartbeat movie was. And that's generally the case. If you put whiteness first, then you'll do okay in this society. This is not up for debate. It's just a matter of historical fact. And that reality has found its way into this new media space that purports to be something that it's not. Because new media, progressive new media, is just as white and male dominated as old media. Just on the sheer numbers. And again, this is not to say that, Kyle Kalinske needs to give up his platform to a black woman, or, woman of color. This is not to say that. But this is to say that there are structural reasons, why certain messages that don't offend the sensibilities of white men are more successful. Which brings me full circle. That's why I want to say thank you to you, my audience, because you afford me the opportunity, and so much that I also demand. You stayed with me as I demanded the freedom to talk about whatever I feel like talking about. Whatever I feel is pressing. You've given me that autonomy, and I'm blessed to have an audience that gives me that autonomy or respects the fact that I demand that autonomy. And also, I guess I would like to thank myself. I would like to thank myself because I'm more concerned with my voice being heard in terms of what it is that I have to say and what I feel is important than I am concerned with having a large audience to say what they want me to say. Now, eventually, that paradigm is going to shift for me. And let's just be real. I'm not gonna front. Eventually, I've got to make some dollars. I got to make this money, man. I've got to make this money. But the path that I've tread so far has been, I will take the road less traveled and do the less popular thing in order to make sure that I have established my voice. So it's like that's what we do, right? You allow me to speak about what I want to speak about because I demand the ability to do so. And that paradigm may change and probably will change over time, simply because of, there's a time and place. I will always have this podcast as a way of saying exactly what I feel and what I say. But I did not want this space that we have to ever be controlled, even by people that I generally agree with, right? I generally agree with a lot of white progressives, particularly on economic policy, but there are problems in our spaces that as soon as we address them, well, the relationship, the nature of the relationship changes significantly. And this is somewhat of what we were talking about with that's a long enough introduction. All right, so here comes the conversation with Q and Aaron, and it's perched upon the recent interactions that I've had with Jimmy Dore's supporters, because Jimmy Dore has always dodged the bullet. Jimmy Dore doesn't want any smoke with me. He's, since 2016, anytime I've had to call him out on something, he's 100% avoided me. So this is where the conversation, evolved. So enjoy part one of this, And tomorrow, I'm going to come back with more of Professor Sinkowitz. And then Friday, the rest of this conversation. Like I said, I have a lot of content for you, and I think all of it is critically important. So take a listen in.
Well, this is my biggest issue with Jimmy Dore is the fact that he represents a class of whiteness that is so ambivalent and I would say almost oblivious to their whiteness, that they only use black issues when it's time for props to come out. And I think that you have to address that because Jimmy uses Patreon like a lot of people do. Everyone uses Patreon, right? But the thing is, though, is that, like you said, there's no movement behind what is being said. If you're only theorizing and if you're only speaking, but there's no praxis and there is no movement, then it's useless to me, man. Especially when the fact of the matter is that you're willing to align with Tucker Carlson, a literal white supremacist who has talked about the browning of Europe, used code words like white genocide, like miss me with this whole I'm just telling the truth. If you're willing to stand up, first of all, I just want to say that personally, I've been watching Jimmy for like the last year, and it's just very funny to me because it's just like, if you really want to sit here and tell me that you're for this progressive wave, and yet the only segments I've seen you do on black issues, on indigenous issues, on, you know, LGBTQ plus issues is when there is only a fever pitch moment happening, but every other month you're doing a segment on how much you agree with Tucker Carlson. That's utterly ridiculous. That's utterly ridiculous, and that's just irresponsible, and that speaks to the class of whiteness that I'm talking about. And the class of whiteness that I'm talking about is the progressives who believe that their whiteness absolves them. The progressives who believe that their progressiveness or their progressivehood absolves them of their stake in whiteness and dismantling the material privileges that whiteness comes with on this nation. So the thing is that Jimmy, for so long, has been trying to make money off of the whole we've been scorned by the Hillary crowd, and there's space for that, obviously. We've been scorned by Hillary crowd. We need to leave the Democratic Party. What are you doing?
Yeah.
What are you actually doing? If you really want to see this third party come about, why don't you go do it, Jimmy? Why don't you and everybody else who was a Patreon of you, why don't y'all fund those thousands of dollars that you get every month into actually starting a party in California that can can actually go for a seat,
or even supporting the Green Party. Like I literally talked to these people, like a lot of them, and asked them, have they gone to a Green Party meeting? And all of them, every single one of them has said no, they haven't been to one yet. So what are you doing? And I only interrupt you. I want you to get back to it, Q, but I interrupted you because I think it's important for the audience to understand, if they don't understand your politics, how it differs from my politics and Aaron's, then they might confuse you for being an establishment guy just based on what you said. But you are so far to the left of me that you and I really get in heated disagreements all of the time. So it's not like you're speaking this from any kind of centrist, neoliberal, or any remotely close to the black establishment perspective. You're speaking this from probably the furthest left of anybody who would listen to this podcast.
I am a communist. Like I am a literal communist. I am for literally workers of the world united, all that Marxist shit. Yes, like this is what I do. I am for the collectivization of all profits. I'm for stripping CEOs of all their assets. So this is not just some dude talking about, oh, we need to go and just be okay with Cory Booker in 2020. No, Jimmy Dore is a reactionary. Mm-hmm. Jimmy Dore does nothing on the ground. I have heard nothing from his Patreon going to movements. Are you even serving the people in California? They do all these shows, and they always talk about the homeless population in California. Jimmy, use some of those thousands or use some of those hundreds that you get to go and do, live shows around the country. Use some of those hundreds to just go pass out hygiene products to all the homeless camps in California. Shout out to my brother Blake and shout out to my brother Delancey, because they up there at Bay Area, Hella Black Podcast. I just want to plug that because they actually go up to the homeless camps and they actually serve the people. Clothes, hygiene products,
that's
food,
what's up.
Jobs if they can get it. That's what they do. That's what serving the people looks like. and they still are able to maintain a podcast. So miss me with this whole, I'm just so busy, we can't do it. But you're not busy enough to come to the defense of Alex Jones, who literally incited a man to go into a pizza shop with a gun that could have ended in another mass shooting. You're going to bat for that. The only time I've seen Jimmy talk about black issue was when James Comey went to Howard. And those are my friends up at Howard, my communist friends up at Howard.
Right.
Ain't you resist. That's the only time you've ever done anything about a black issue. The only time that you talked about indigenous issues was the water protectors. The only time that you talked about the LGBTQ issues, I haven't even seen that. But every other month, it's Tucker Carlson needs to be protected because his speech is valid and he's a friend. You know what I'm saying?
Or the Alex Jones.
It's just, or Alex Jones or Caitlin Johnstone, who, you know, completely gentrifies the word woke for her own book title. There's just so much BS happening in Jimmy's circle. But my biggest critique is that this is bigger than just Jimmy Dore.
Right.
This is a lot of white Patreon progressives who sit in their ivory tower of Patreon cash and look down at everyone else and say, you're not doing enough because you all are sheep and you all are this and that. Well, what are you actually doing, Jimmy? Where are your movements? Where is your movement on the ground? And it's not anywhere.
Just for a little more context, it's like, you know, me and Anoa and I, we literally scrape every single month to do the things that we do. And sometimes to just survive, right? Just to make it in our personal finances, right? But we're out here. Noah's out on the ground, like literally organizing. I'm out here scraping dollars to organize and make sure that we have people have a platform to keep their voices up. Like literally every penny that goes into the Progressive Army is coming out of my pocket. And in context, we have this flood of money in progressive circles that is concentrated exactly how you said, Q. And it's not about beefing because they have more money. It's about the usage of that money. It's like the revolution could be funded. You know what I mean? People could actually be moved into action, but it's really being consolidated in areas, in voices that are detrimental to black people and indigenous people and marginalized communities in general. Because even if they say something positive, because this is what you're going to get based on what you just said and what we're discussing, they're going to say, oh, Jimmy covered this story, Jimmy covered that story. You know why he covered it? You know why TYT covers these? And you see the Irish boy who comes across our screen all the time on Facebook and Hassan, what's his name? You know why they cover it? Because it's good for clicks. Like they're going to get 8 million clicks off of it, and they know. But if that's the perspective from which you're covering our issues, and that's the only time we hear you talking about our issues, how can you really call yourself an ally? I know we're getting off on a tangent, but I think that's kind of like that's a part of that's a symptom of the bigger problem. Aaron, and then back to Q.
Well, regarding the situation with Tucker Carlson and him kind of saying things, I guess you can say he was applauding Tucker Carlson for taking his anti-war stances and quote unquote telling the truth on national TV, unlike other media pundits and whatnot. So I think the trap that Jimmy is falling into, and it's the same trap that Caitlin Johnstone,
one of those.
I don't care to say her name right. To be honest with you, and H.A. Goodman, is that they fall into the trap of thinking that people who are a part of these alt-right, neo-Nazi, white supremacist, whatever you want to call them, groups, is that because they have like the same conclusions, that it's beneficial to actually work with them on this key specific issue, even if they would like openly disagree on other issues. And I adamantly disagree with that. So if I actually put this on Twitter in our chat, Media Matters, shout out to them. They actually have like a montage of Tucker Carlson echoing like white nationalist, white supremacist, and neo-Nazi talking points on air. And he's basically saying almost word for word things that people like Mike Enoch would say. So for people who don't know who that is, Mike Enoch, he's a blogger, he's a neo-Nazi, and he's a Holocaust denier. Jared Taylor, for example, he's a white supremacist. Tucker Carlson has echoed his sentiments. Lauren Southern, Who else? David Duke.
Yeah, word for word.
He was the Grand Master of the Ku Klux Klan. So the part that's like pulling teeth to a lot of people in progressive spaces is trying to get them to understand that people like Mike Cernovich and Tucker Carlson, they don't adopt these anti-war stances for the same reasons that we do.
Right.
So they adopt those. So when we adopt those stances, for one, it's a moral stance first and foremost. I mean, surely all of us here think it's bad that we drop bombs upon bombs for years on the Middle East and kill like 90% the wrong people.
Right.
It's for one, it's really expensive. It puts a lot of people in danger, and that's money that we could be using to actually fund our social safety net programs here instead of wasting all trillions upon trillions of dollars to fight wars in the Middle East.
Right.
But when you're talking about people like Tucker Carlson and people like Mike Enoch and people like Lauren Southern and people like Mike Cernovich, who he echoes on national TV, the reason that they adopt those anti-war stances is because when we engage in war in the Middle East, for one, that destabilizes the region. And what winds up occurring is that people wind up leaving those Middle Eastern countries.
Exactly.
And they immigrate to places like Europe and to the United States. Exactly. Which is something that they don't want because of their anti-immigrant stances, and they have those white nationalist sentiments.
I said this actually a couple of months ago. Said it on my timeline. I was like the white progressive Patreon people. I really think it's very poignant that we talk about the fact that they do all this for Patreon. And it's not that I'm shitting on people who want to, make a coin. It's not that. I understand everybody has to get their money. This is a capitalist society, and everyone's just trying to stay afloat. But my biggest problem is that when it comes to ID politics, and I guess you could say the demonization or the weaponization of it, they have taken such a hard right stance against ID politics that it is a complete, utter insult to the black scholars, and I guess you could say almost, black feminist scholars, specifically people like Kimberly Crenshaw, who've done the work of intersectionality. It's a complete insult to it, because intersectionality was never about, hey, I'm black, I'm gay, I'm Muslim, so that means I'm more oppressed than you. It was always about, I hold these identities, and that's how I experience these institutions and societal ills. Right. So it's different for a black trans woman to experience getting stopped and frisked by the police in New York than it is for a gay white woman to get stopped and frisked in New York. It's different. I don't care what it is. Yes, y'all are both in the same community, but y'all do not occupy the same margin, so you do not experience the same things. It's the exact same way for this whole progressive movement. They think that, we're all on the bottom, we're all not in the 1%, which I think that's such a reductionist narrative also, that people seem to think that just because we're not in the 1%, that some of us don't experience class in different ways. Right. I don't get to go around the country to tell jokes about Hillary Clinton for $400 and then go back to my show to get thousands of dollars every month for Patreon. I don't get to do that. I'm a black man in America. That's just what it is. And most black people in America have been disadvantaged because of the capital gains of slavery for white people. So when it comes to the demonization of ID politics, they've shown me time and time again that they're willing to sheepdog people into right-wing camps, right-wing think tanks, right-wing ideologies. And the thing is, though, is that the hypocrisy and the cognitive whiteness that shows up in that is that Jimmy will turn around and say that Bernie Sanders, which he is, but this is hypocrisy, he'll say that Bernie Sanders is sheepdogging progressives into the Democratic Party. Well, it seems to me that you are sheepdogging progressives into Auschwitz. So what the hell is he talking about? Like, that doesn't make any sense. So my biggest issue with the whole ID politics thing, aside from that, is just the fact that no one ever really calls out these white progressives for what they are, and they are white. It's not a matter of hate. It's not a matter of bigotry. It is simply just a matter of recognizing how class is racialized in America.
Come on, man.
Depending on your race, you will experience class different ways. A white middle-class person experiences class differently than a black middle-class person.
Absolutely.
A brown middle-class person experiences, and so on and so forth and so forth. But they want to flatten this circle so we can all get on this kumbaya stuff about how, oh, we're all in the same boat. And I'm a communist, so you don't have to tell me about workers of the world uniting. But the thing is, though, is that a settler is still a settler. And your ancestors still settled this land. So you still have stake in this game. So I can't just come out here and trust you and think that you have my best interest in heart when you want to stand up for people who have literally called Jews vampires like Alex Jones, which is literal Nazi Mein Kampf rhetoric. And then you want to turn around and say that Tucker Carlson has courage because he's co-opting anti-Bezos rhetoric. That is so damn dangerous. And I just think that it needs to be called out because I see it happening all over. And my last point here, Ben, this is my last point about when you talked about
identity politics,
black faces.
Oh, yeah.
And how they will always look for someone to be on that anti-ID politics side. When black Republicans or black conservatives like Candace Owens sit around and talk about how they left the Democrat plantation and now they're on the Republican plantation, essentially, and how much more enlightened they are because they finally understand the world for what it is and all that rhetoric, right? We all know that story. To me, it's very telling watching Jimmy show that I can't name one time in which he's had a black radical come on his show. I can't name really one time when he's had a brown radical of any identity come on his show. I've never seen him talk to a communist besides, and I wouldn't even say that Richard Wolff is a communist. He's a Marxist economic theorist, so that's not really a communist. I haven't seen him talk to a staunch socialist. I haven't seen him talk to an anarchist who isn't white. And that just shows you that the platform that Jimmy has is all about protecting whiteness at the end of the day. It's all about protecting his whiteness. And the thing is, though, that I'm going to keep saying it, and it's going to make some people uncomfortable, but until white progressives, and trust me, white progressives are not the only people that have this problem.
Yeah, for sure.
White communists, white anarchists, white whatever you hold, whatever your sectarian identity is, we have this problem everywhere, where they think that their political ideology or their political alignments absolve them of the fact that they still inherited or they still benefit from the material privilege of whiteness.
Yeah.
So I just want to point that out, that Jimmy, I haven't seen you do anything with a black radical. I haven't seen you talk to any anarchist, talk to anybody who is not white. And I think that that's very, very important to point out because they would challenge and destroy your entire class view.
Right. And Q, you said something. You actually learned me something here. I learned something from you here because this is important. Like, I mean, I understood the fact that even within a certain class, you still have variations in that class structure, right? We all experience class differently, regardless of if we're so-called middle class or working class. But there is a phenomenon going on with this Patreon money, and this is why you're pointing it out. I guess it's just now clicking for me. Is that this money is really white money going to white voices who are structurally advantaged because they don't have the burden of carrying any concern about marginalized communities or having to talk about race, having to talk about gender, having to talk about orientation. They just give something. They give something that is so palatable to whiteness that they are the beneficiaries of whiteness, just directly, number for number. And if you take a look at any marginalized, I mean, I got to think hard, and maybe you guys can help me out. But who is a successful progressive black voice that's actually like able to travel the country and make the money doing the work, and I say progressive, so that definitely, absolutely, 100% does not include DeRay McKesson, right? So let's just be sure. But I'm talking about in this YouTube podcast, independent media space, I mean, who's actually, because it ain't me. If people think it's me, like, nigga, I gotta go to work later. I mean, I'm out here, I'm scratching and surviving. Good time, isn't it? You know what I mean? So who's actually the beneficiary of this white space, and who's able to do it from a black perspective? Now, you have people like Yvette Carnell who just like shun all of the, whiteness and all together and just go straight black perspective, right? Which, it's a thing. And I don't know if I don't know how well she's doing. I know she's doing good. But in this space, like, who else is doing it? It's exclusively white almost. Or correct me if I'm wrong.
When it comes to progressives, I need you all to put your feet on the ground. I need you to put your funds in black and brown pockets. I need you to put your funds in black and brown pockets, put your feet on the ground. We don't need any more Jimmy Dores. We don't need any more Kyle Kalinskis. We don't need any more H.A. Goodmans.
God
we
forbid.
Need John Browns.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I need. I don't need Jimmys. I need John Browns who are willing to put their feet on the ground. Well, your identity as an anti-racist should be something that you live every single day. It shouldn't be a thing. I don't need allies. To me, and this is a quote from Robin D.G. Kelly, I'll end it with this. Allies are people that wait to step in. Comrades are people that are locked in with you arm to arm, step in step, and they're willing to put their body in front of you for the cause. No more Jimmys. We need John Browns.
That's what's up. Aaron, we've been talking. I know we had a mic situation with you, but I'll let you get the last word, brother.
The last thing I'll say regarding identity politics mess is that I understood the backlash to identity politics in the context that the Democratic Party weaponizes it.
Yep.
So, like, 100%. What I mean by that, like, you won't put me in a position where I defend the Democratic Party on this end. Like, the Democratic Party does like to pretend as if they're the arbiter on all matters concerning race and identity and sexual identity and so on and so forth. But what's really disappointing is when I've seen people who are in progressive spaces, especially ones who have very big platforms like Jimmy. I think Kyle Kalinske, I like a lot of Kyle's content. I think he's kind of fallen into this trap too, is that he's bought into a right wing framework regarding how the left uses identity politics so much to the point that they seem to push back against the concept of identity politics in general.
Yeah.
And I think the issue with that is, for one, the right is very disingenuous when it comes to identity politics, first and foremost. Like, there is no political coalition that exists now, that did exist, or that probably ever will exist, that wasn't like built around some collective sense of identity.
Right.
So whether it be like religious identity, urban identity, rural, of course, gender identity, sex, nationality, culture. The right is every bit as vocal in their identity politics as the left is. But I think the right is a lot more, I would say that they're a lot more effective at lambasting the left for it. And I kind of push back against them who seem to think that identity politics is bad in general, is because if you look at the way, especially the way our history is in this country, at least, is that, specific groups of people don't have the same problems.
Right.
So, like, if you're talking about like Black people, like the extent to which progressives who have these very, very big platforms, the extent to which they even focus on Black issues, it seems to be only related to stuff related to police violence and stuff that's related to incarceration. Now, it's not that those issues aren't important, which they are, but what's kind of frustrating to me when I see them talk about Black issues is that they really seem to only think that those are the problems that specifically affect Black people.
Right.
I don't want to really strawman them, but like, if that's like the bulk of your content, I really don't have anything else to go by. But there are other problems that are in the Black community that are far more devastating, or at least every bit as devastating. Because like I very rarely ever see them ever talk about things like redline real estate tactics and discrimination in housing loans and business loans and so on and so forth. But that's just kind of like my spiel on their anti-identity politics hill that they've decided to die on in the last year or so.
Okay, so we're back up to date. Today is you're back with me. The conversation with them is over for today. Thanks to Q and Aaron for chiming in their own way. A lot of things came out of that conversation that I thought were very beneficial and actually put things into perspective for me. Up to this point, sometimes you're just oblivious to what's happening around you. But up to this point, I never really considered just how white independent media and how male independent media is. And that's a reflection of the society around us. That's a reflection of the power structure around us. And and similarly, you know what it is? It's not news to me, but the reality of it is that this isn't. I don't think it was in today's segment, but on Friday's segment, Q is going to say something very, very poignant, and I guess I'm just going to spill it now. He's going to say something along the lines of just historically, Black people have had to support Black people, Black platforms, and it seems. I mean, of course, he mentions also. He mentioned in this podcast today, John Brown's versus Jimmy Dore's, just kind of drawing a stark comparison there. But I mean, historically, there have always been a handful of genuinely anti-racist people and people who are genuinely interested in what you have to say, which brings me full circle back to thanking you, my listener, because you don't come here. You used to come here to get just what's happening in the news, right? But that's being done so much, and it became vitally important that I talked about the issues that are critical as they come up, whether it be the news cycle or whether it be something like this, something that that really is not a conversation that's not being had in these progressive circles. And I can't just I can't gallivant around in these progressive circles and act like everything is cool because I have a large following. It's not, because there's a whole breadth and depth of conversations and issues that are happening to marginalized communities. And from my identity, my perspective, the Black community, that simply are not even addressed, not even mentioned. They don't exist. And we're only talked about even in progressive circles. Y'all, I'm in the South now. Do you realize even in progressive circles, the only stories that are told about Black people are the stories about police brutality, and that's because those are great for clicks. I mean, sure, I'm not saying that people don't genuinely care about them, but if that's the only lens through which you experience us, and that's the only lens that I understand racial justice, then it becomes understandable that you have a issue when we start pointing out the racial disparity in these circles, or the racism, quite frankly, in these circles. So it's very, I won't say it's complicated, but there's so many layers to this, because again, in my support group, in my patrons, the people who actually fund this program, it's probably predominantly white. And what stands out about that, the thing I love about that, is that clearly every single one of my patrons, they're here to hear my voice at this point. I mean, there was a hard shift over this last summer where I was making this paradigm shift away from one thing to another thing. But the people who are here now, supporting us now, they're here because they want to hear my perspective on a wide range of topics. They're not here just because I say what they want to hear said from a Black person. They're not. They couldn't be, because that's not what they're getting in my show. And that's rare. And that's when I tweeted this morning, if you really want to understand who genuinely wants to hear your voice, then talk about race. Talk about something that makes them uncomfortable, that could potentially make them uncomfortable. Talk about something that, that you may disagree with them on. Talk about issues that you have friction. That don't just talk about the things that give you an alley-oop, right? A slam dunk, an easy toss. That kind of thing, there are going to be occasions when we can agree on those things. And when we can all high five each other and we have one of those amazing periods of time where we're all on one accord and we all agree on everything that we're talking about. But there has to be, in terms of fundamental growth and depth of your solidarity, we have to hash these things out. It's not possible for us to be in solidarity with each other if we don't discuss these things. And if, when these things come up, your tendency is to turn away from us and to say, oh, you're just playing identity politics, then were you really an ally ever to begin with? So I'm going to end today's podcast the way I started it. To my audience, both my patrons who support the show, who you are invaluable, don't ever go anywhere. Thank you. And to those people who just listen, thank you, because you come to hear me and you come to hear my perspective. And you're not here just to have me regurgitate what you want to hear just from a different person. And also, I'd like to thank myself. I mean, who gets on stage and accepts an award and say, I'd like to thank God and I like to thank myself. But no, I want to thank myself, and I hope that you, obviously you do appreciate the fact. I don't have to hope for it because you're here. You do appreciate the fact that I demand the ability that in this space on the Benjamin Dixon Show, now whatever I go and do on somebody else's show, somebody else's platform, somebody else's, well, not if I'm writing. If I'm writing, I have to write. It's not possible for me to write unless it's something from me, from my soul. So take that one off the table. But if it's like somebody hires me to do a news broadcast, then fine, we can cover the news. The point is this, is that you have allowed me to have this space, and I have required of you to allow me to have the space. And for that, I'm thankful. And because of that, I think we will always discuss things that people are not discussing yet, but they will be eventually. They'll come around to it because it's an important issue and we know how to push it. That's it. I don't have anything else to say. Part 2 of Professor Sinkowitz tomorrow, and part 2 of Q and Aaron on Friday. Have a great week.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.